June 14, 2017 was supposed to become one of the happiest weeks in Daniel Costa's life. After years of saving, he had finally taken his wife and 2 daughters on the Mediterranean cruise they had dreamed about for nearly a decade. The weather was perfect, the ship was full, the vacation had barely reached its halfway point. 3,000 passengers were enjoying dinner when Daniel Costa disappeared. Nobody heard him scream, nobody saw him leave, nobody reported a struggle. Yet less than 2 hours later, cruise security was searching the entire ship for a father who seemed to have vanished into thin air. At first, everyone assumed the answer would be simple: a medical emergency, an accident, a man who got lost somewhere aboard a vessel. But as the hours passed, something began to terrify investigators. Daniel Costa wasn't just missing, he was missing in a way that shouldn't have been possible. His keycard stopped moving, his phone stopped responding, his trail simply ended. Security cameras showed where he had been. They never showed where he went. For 7 years, his wife lived with a question nobody could answer. Did Daniel fall into the sea? Was he kidnapped? Did he leave voluntarily? Then, 7 years later, a customs officer inspecting a sealed shipping container in Rotterdam noticed something so unusual that he immediately contacted authorities. What he discovered would reopen the entire case and force investigators to question everything they thought they knew about the night Daniel Costa vanished. The Costa family wasn't wealthy, but they were comfortable. Daniel had worked at the same accounting firm for 18 years. Maria taught elementary school. Their daughters, Elena and Sofia, were honor students. Neighbors described them as friendly, private, and completely ordinary. Daniel coached Sofia's soccer team. He volunteered at the church. People used the same words again and again: reliable, responsible, predictable. But for months leading up to the cruise, Maria noticed something changing in him. He seemed lighter, more excited. He'd purchased an expensive camera. He'd been learning Greek phrases. He told colleagues this was going to be the experience that reminded him what life was about. The cruise departed from Rome on a warm Saturday. The ship was enormous: 14 decks, multiple restaurants, and 3 pools. The Costas spent the first 2 days exploring. They ate elaborate breakfasts and watched the sunset from the upper deck. Daniel took hundreds of photographs. He seemed more relaxed than Maria had seen him in years. On the 3rd day, the ship docked in Athens. The family took a shore excursion to the Acropolis. Daniel hired a local guide who showed them hidden viewpoints away from the tourist crowds. He asked questions about history, architecture, and philosophy. That evening, back on the ship, the family had dinner together. Daniel ordered wine, which Maria noted was unusual. He was celebratory. He raised his glass and thanked his wife and daughters for being his whole world. Maria squeezed his hand. It was a perfect moment. Around 9:15, the family returned to their staterooms. Daniel said he was going to take a walk on the upper deck. He kissed Maria's forehead and said he'd be back in 30 minutes. He took his phone but left his wallet and room key. Daniel never came back. At first, Maria wasn't concerned. She assumed he'd gotten caught up watching the ocean or talking to another passenger. But when an hour passed, Maria felt the first flutter of worry. She called his cell phone. It rang once and went to voicemail. The ship felt enormous at night. Hallways stretched in every direction. Maria checked the upper deck where Daniel said he was going. She checked the casino, the theater, the pool area. Nothing. She returned to the room, thinking maybe he'd come back while she was searching. The room was empty. His wallet sat on the dresser. His reading glasses were on the nightstand. His shoes were lined up neatly by the closet. A luxury cruise is meant to be a dream getaway. But for Maria, the nightmare began in the dead of night, in a silent hallway. The staff were polite, yet dismissive. They insisted that passengers often wander the decks late at night, losing track of time under the stars. But back in the cabin, the silence was deafening. Her daughters, Elena and Sofia, sat frozen, staring at a phone that refused to ring. By 1:30 a.m., the concern turned into a formal search. A knock at the door brought news Maria wasn't ready to hear. Daniel was nowhere. She showed them the last photo of him. Daniel at the Parthenon, smiling, his camera always around his neck, a man with everything to live for. The search intensified. Security teams combed through empty bars, deserted lounges, and the labyrinth of corridors that snake through the massive vessel. As dawn broke over the horizon near Istanbul, the ship began to slow. On the bridge, the captain made the call no one ever wants. Turkish authorities boarded the vessel at 7:15 a.m. In a cold, brightly lit office, Maria recounted the timeline of their final evening together. Then came the CCTV. At 9:20 p.m., Daniel was seen leaving his room. He appeared calm, composed, walking with purpose toward the upper decks. The cameras tracked him to an elevator on deck 12. He stepped out and walked toward the stern, the very edge of the floating city. He stood at the railing for 4 minutes, staring into the dark Aegean Sea. Then he simply walked out of the camera's view. But there was a terrifying glitch. The very camera that should have captured his next move had stopped recording at 8:45 p.m. Investigators scrubbed through hundreds of hours of footage, hallways, stairs, elevators. Daniel never appeared on any other screen. It was as if he vanished. They checked the storage rooms, the mechanical spaces, even the ship's chapel. Every corner was searched, but every corner was empty and silent. The Turkish Coast Guard launched a massive search operation, scanning the cold, dark waters for any sign of life as the sun began to set. A witness, an elderly woman, recalled seeing someone by the railing. But when shown Daniel's photo, her certainty faded into a confused silence. Daniel Costa was never found. To this day, his disappearance remains a chilling mystery. In the middle of the ocean, a man simply evaporated. A crew member reported seeing someone near the crew access stairwell on deck 10 around 9:50. He described a man in light-colored clothing moving quickly as if he was in a hurry. But again, identification was impossible. The crew member had only glimpsed the person from a distance. The most troubling statement came from a teenage passenger who'd been on deck 13 directly above where Daniel was last seen. The boy, 17 years old and traveling with his parents, told investigators he'd heard raised voices around 9:30. He couldn't make out words, but it sounded like two people arguing, then silence. He thought nothing of it at the time. When pressed for details, he couldn't say if the voices were male or female, or how many people were involved. He'd been wearing headphones and only heard fragments. The FBI became involved on the second day. When American citizens go missing abroad, especially under suspicious circumstances, federal authorities take jurisdiction. 2 agents flew to Istanbul and boarded the ship. They re-interviewed Maria and the girls. They reviewed all security footage. They examined Daniel's stateroom for any evidence of planning or intent. They looked through his belongings, his clothes, his camera, his laptop, his phone records. What they found was a man who'd shown no signs of planning to disappear. Daniel's camera contained hundreds of photos from the vacation. Recent shots showed him smiling with his family. His laptop had work files, family photos, and browsing history related to Greek history and photography tips. His email showed correspondence with colleagues about projects he'd be returning to after the vacation. There were no concerning searches, no farewell letters, no financial irregularities. His bank accounts were normal. No large withdrawals, no secret debts, no hidden assets. Maria told agents that Daniel had been happy. Their marriage was solid. They'd been together for 20 years. They had arguments like any couple, but nothing serious. Never violence, never threats, never talk of separation. Daniel loved his daughters. He'd been excited about Sophia's upcoming soccer tournament. He'd already registered Elena for an SAT prep course. He was planning to repaint the kitchen when they got home. These were not the actions of a man preparing to vanish. The FBI conducted psychological analysis based on interviews and background checks. Daniel showed no history of depression, no mental health treatment, no suicidal ideation, no recent trauma or stress. His colleagues described him as stable and content. His doctor confirmed Daniel was in good physical health. He took no medications. He had no conditions that might cause sudden disorientation or collapse. Yet somewhere on that ship, between 9:27 and 9:50 on a calm May evening, Daniel Costa had ceased to exist. The cruise line faced intense scrutiny. How could someone disappear from a ship with so many people and so many security measures? Company representatives insisted they'd followed all protocols. They'd searched immediately. They'd contacted authorities. They'd cooperated fully with investigations, but questions persisted about the malfunctioning camera. Why had it stopped working at that exact location at that exact time? Was it coincidence or sabotage? Technicians examined the camera system. They found that the camera had experienced a power interruption. The cause was unclear. It could have been a simple electrical fault. It could have been deliberate tampering, but there was no evidence of forced access to the equipment. The camera housing showed no signs of damage. The wiring appeared intact. Whatever caused the malfunction left no trace. Investigators considered every scenario. Accident seemed unlikely. The railings were chest-high. Daniel would have had to climb or fall over them. There were no witnesses to such an event. Suicide was possible but felt wrong. Daniel had no known reasons and had shown no warning signs. Foul play remained a possibility, but there was no motive, no suspects, and no evidence of violence. As days passed, the investigation expanded internationally. Interpol was notified. Port authorities in every city the ship had visited were contacted. Immigration records were checked to see if Daniel had somehow left the ship during a port stop. His passport never showed up. No hotels had him registered. No flights had him booked. No car rentals. No credit card usage. If Daniel had left voluntarily, he'd done so without leaving any digital footprint. The ship eventually continued its route, returning to Rome a week later. Maria and the girls flew home to Portland, devastated and confused. The FBI continued working the case from the United States. They interviewed Daniel's friends, co-workers, and extended family. They searched his house, his office, his car. They examined his computer more thoroughly, looking for hidden files or encrypted communications. They found nothing that explained what happened. Weeks became months. The investigation stalled. Without a body, without witnesses, without evidence, there was nowhere to go. The case remained open but inactive. The Coast Guard search had found no remains. The ocean had given up nothing. Daniel Costa was officially listed as missing and presumed dead. Maria struggled to accept this reality. How could her husband be gone without explanation? How could someone just vanish? She started her own investigation, contacting other passengers who'd been on the cruise. She created a website asking for information. She hired a private investigator who specialized in missing persons cases. The investigator reviewed everything the FBI had collected and came to the same frustrating conclusion. There simply wasn't enough evidence to determine what happened. The private investigator did uncover one interesting detail. 3 months before the cruise, Daniel had received a friend request on social media from someone named Marcus Levine. The two had exchanged a few messages. Marcus claimed to be an old college friend, though Maria had never heard Daniel mention anyone by that name. The messages were friendly and vague, mostly reminiscing about old times and catching up. Marcus asked where Daniel was living now, what he was doing for work. Daniel answered politely but didn't engage deeply. The conversation ended after a few exchanges. The FBI tracked down the Marcus Levine account. It was fake. The profile photos were stock images. The account had been created specifically to contact Daniel and was deleted shortly after he disappeared. Investigators tried to trace the account's IP address. It had been accessed through various proxy servers, making it impossible to identify the real person behind it. This was the first concrete evidence that someone had been monitoring Daniel before the cruise. But who and why? This discovery shifted the investigation. Maybe Daniel hadn't disappeared by accident. Maybe someone had targeted him specifically, but this raised more questions than answers. Daniel was an accountant. He had no enemies. He wasn't involved in anything illegal or controversial. He had no secret life, no hidden activities. What could anyone possibly want with him? Investigators looked into Daniel's work. He specialized in corporate tax accounting for mid-sized businesses. His firm handled legitimate clients, manufacturing companies, retail chains, professional services. The FBI examined the accounts Daniel managed, looking for irregularities or connections to criminal activity. They found nothing suspicious. Daniel's work was clean, thorough, and unremarkable. Still, the fake social media account nagged at investigators. Someone had gone to considerable effort to make contact with Daniel before he vanished. This suggested planning, premeditation. But planning what? If someone had wanted to kill Daniel, why do it on a cruise ship with thousands of witnesses? If someone had wanted to kidnap him, How had they removed him from a moving vessel? One theory proposed that Daniel had been recruited by an intelligence agency. Maybe his accounting skills had made him valuable for some operation. Maybe he'd agreed to disappear and assume a new identity. But this theory fell apart under scrutiny. Daniel had no specialized knowledge or skills that would interest intelligence services. His work was straightforward corporate accounting. He had no language abilities beyond basic Spanish. He had no connections to defense contractors, government agencies, or sensitive industries. Another theory suggested organized crime. Maybe Daniel had unknowingly uncovered financial crimes while working on client accounts. Maybe he'd been eliminated to protect someone. But again, investigators found no evidence. They examined every account Daniel had touched in the past 5 years. Nothing unusual appeared. No money laundering, no fraud, no connections to known criminal enterprises. Maria refused to give up. She appeared on news programs pleading for information. She posted on missing persons forums. She contacted psychics, though she didn't really believe in them. She just needed to do something. Elena and Sofia tried to move forward with their lives, but grief and confusion haunted them. How do you mourn someone who might still be alive? How do you accept a death without a body, without answers? Years passed. The case grew cold. The FBI moved on to active investigations. The cruise line settled a civil lawsuit with Maria, though no admission of wrongdoing was made. The settlement included a confidentiality agreement, but Maria later said it was never about money. She just wanted someone to be held accountable, someone to acknowledge that her husband had been failed. Life continued in that suspended, painful way it does after unresolved loss. Elena graduated high school and went to college. Sofia followed 2 years later. Maria kept teaching, kept living, kept hoping for answers she knew might never come. The house felt empty. Daniel's clothes still hung in the closet. His books sat on the shelves. His coffee mug remained in the cabinet. Maria couldn't bring herself to pack these things away. Some part of her believed that if she waited long enough, he'd walk back through the door with an explanation that made everything make sense. 7 years after Daniel vanished, a routine customs inspection at the port of Rotterdam in the Netherlands turned everything upside down. A customs officer named Henrik van der Berg was inspecting shipping containers that afternoon. It was monotonous work. Most containers held exactly what their manifest claimed: electronics, clothing, machinery, consumer goods. Henrik had been doing this job for 12 years. He'd developed an instinct for which containers warranted closer inspection. On this particular day, something about container number TCLU 38479291 bothered him. The manifest claimed it contained office furniture being shipped from Istanbul to a buyer in Amsterdam. But the weight seemed off. The container felt lighter than it should. Henrik opened the container and began examining the contents. The furniture was there: desks, chairs, filing cabinets, all properly packed. But as Henrik moved deeper into the container, he noticed one filing cabinet seemed hollow. When he opened it, he found a sealed plastic bag hidden inside. The bag contained documents, passports, identification cards, financial records, and a cell phone. One of the passports belonged to Daniel Costa. Henrik immediately contacted his supervisor. Within hours, Interpol was notified. The FBI was contacted. Dutch police secured the container and its contents. The investigation that had gone dormant for 7 years suddenly exploded back to life. The documents in that filing cabinet told a story no one had anticipated. Along with Daniel's passport were 2 other passports, one British, one German, both in different names but featuring Daniel's photograph. There were bank statements showing accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands with substantial balances. There were property deeds for apartments in Berlin and Prague. There were burner phones and encrypted USB drives. Daniel Costa hadn't been a victim. He'd been running. The cell phone found in the container was a breakthrough. It was an older model, but forensic technicians were able to extract data from it. The phone contained text messages between Daniel and someone identified only as M. The messages spanned the 3 months before the cruise. They were cryptic but revealing. "Are the arrangements confirmed?" Daniel had written. "Everything is ready. Istanbul transfer as discussed. Don't deviate from the timeline. What about my family? They cannot know. You understood this from the beginning. I know. It's harder than I thought. Second thoughts. No, I'm committed, just harder." The messages showed Daniel had been planning his disappearance for months. The cruise wasn't a family vacation. It was an exit strategy. Istanbul was the extraction point. Someone had been waiting there to help him vanish. But the messages also revealed something else. Daniel hadn't wanted to leave. He'd been forced to. Further excavation of the phone's data revealed emails Daniel had sent to himself, apparently as a kind of insurance. These emails detailed a situation he'd found himself in 2 years before the cruise. While working on accounts for a client called Meridian Logistics, Daniel had discovered irregularities. Large sums of money were being moved through shell companies. The transactions were carefully disguised, but Daniel's eye for detail had caught the patterns. At first, Daniel thought it was simple tax evasion. He'd planned to report it to his firm's compliance department. But before he could, he received a visit at his office from 2 men who introduced themselves as business consultants. They knew Daniel had found the irregularities. They knew he hadn't reported them yet. They made it clear that Meridian Logistics was connected to people who didn't tolerate exposure. They gave Daniel 2 choices: cooperate or face consequences. Daniel had a family to protect. He cooperated. For 2 years, Daniel had been helping these people, whoever they were, move money through legitimate-looking accounting structures. He hated it. The emails he'd sent himself showed a man in agony, disgusted by what he was doing but terrified of what would happen if he stopped. He'd documented everything, creating a record he planned to use someday as leverage or protection. Then something changed. Daniel's handlers decided he knew too much. The emails didn't specify exactly what triggered their decision, but Daniel had become a liability. They gave him an ultimatum: disappear voluntarily or be disappeared permanently. They offered him a new life, new identity, money, protection, if he agreed to vanish without causing problems. If he refused or tried to go to authorities, his family would be targeted. Daniel chose the only option he felt he had. He planned his own disappearance. The cruise was the cover. The fake social media contact had been part of establishing his new identity network. The malfunctioning camera on Deck 12 hadn't been a coincidence or a technical fault. Someone on the ship's crew had been paid to disable it. When Daniel stood at the railing that night, he was waiting for a signal. At precisely 9:32, a small boat had approached the ship's stern. Daniel had climbed over the railing and dropped approximately 15 feet into the water. The boat retrieved him within minutes. By the time anyone realized he was missing, Daniel was already on his way to Istanbul. The plan had been for Daniel to disappear completely, to live out his days under a new identity in Eastern Europe, where his handlers could keep him monitored and silent. But Daniel had kept those documents as insurance. He'd hidden them in the shipping container, which belonged to one of the companies he'd been moving money for. He'd planned to retrieve them later, though the emails didn't specify when or how. The Dutch police tracked the container's shipping history. It had been in storage in Istanbul for 6 years, then was finally shipped when the company went through a reorganization. The container had been forgotten in bureaucratic shuffle, which was likely why Daniel never retrieved his insurance policy. With this evidence, investigators finally had leverage. The FBI traced the bank accounts. They identified Meridian Logistics as a front for an international money laundering operation, with ties to organized crime in Russia and Turkey. The investigation expanded dramatically. Multiple arrests were made across several countries. The people who'd forced Daniel into this situation were finally identified and charged. But one question remained. Where was Daniel? Using the passports and property records from the container, investigators tracked Daniel's movements after Istanbul. He'd lived in Berlin for 8 months under the name Michael Brenner. Then he'd moved to Prague as David Keller, then to Bucharest, then to Sofia, Bulgaria. Each time he moved, he left a faint trail: rental agreements, utility bills, small purchases. The most recent evidence placed him in a small town in rural Albania. Local police were contacted. They located an apartment registered to a David Keller. When officers arrived, they found Daniel Costa living alone in a modest 2-room flat. He'd aged noticeably. His hair was completely gray now. He'd lost weight. He looked tired, worn down by years of isolation and fear. When officers identified themselves and said they knew who he really was, Daniel didn't run. He didn't resist. He just nodded and said 4 words: "I want to go home." Daniel was taken into custody, not as a criminal suspect, but as a witness and victim. He gave a full statement. He confirmed everything the documents and phone records suggested. He'd been coerced, he'd been threatened, he'd been forced to choose between his life and his family's safety. He'd lived in hiding for 7 years, terrified that his handlers would find him if he made contact with anyone from his old life. The people who'd controlled Daniel were now in custody. The threat had been neutralized. Daniel could finally speak. The FBI faced a complicated situation. Daniel had committed crimes, fraud, money laundering, faking his own death. But he'd been coerced. He'd been protecting his family. Prosecutors reviewed the case and decided not to file criminal charges. Daniel agreed to cooperate fully with the ongoing investigation into the money laundering network. In exchange, he was granted immunity. 3 weeks later, Daniel Costa returned to the United States. Maria received a phone call from an FBI agent she'd spoken with years earlier. He told her to sit down. He told her that Daniel was alive. He told her that Daniel was coming home. Maria didn't believe it at first. She thought it was a cruel joke or a scam. But the agent sent her a photograph. It showed Daniel, older and grayer, but unmistakably him. Maria collapsed to the floor and cried for an hour. Elena and Sophia were told next. They experienced the same disbelief, followed by overwhelming emotion. Their father, who they had mourned, who they had accepted was gone forever, was alive. He was coming home. The reunion happened at a federal facility outside Portland. Security was tight because of the ongoing investigation. Maria entered a small conference room and saw Daniel sitting at a table, flanked by agents. For a moment, neither of them moved. 7 years of grief, confusion, and pain hung in the air between them. Then Maria crossed the room and Daniel stood and they held each other without speaking. Elena and Sophia came in next. Daniel wept when he saw them. They were grown now. Elena was 23, finishing graduate school. Sophia was 21, studying engineering. They'd lived entire chapters of their lives without him. He'd missed Sophia's high school graduation. He'd missed Elena's college years. He'd missed birthdays, holidays, ordinary Tuesday dinners. He'd missed 7 years. The reunion was beautiful and heartbreaking in equal measure. Daniel apologized over and over. He tried to explain why he'd done it, why he hadn't found another way, why he'd let them believe he was dead. Maria and the girls struggled to process it all. They understood intellectually what had happened. He'd been forced, threatened, cornered. But emotionally, the wound was deep. He'd chosen to leave. He'd chosen to let them suffer. Even understanding the circumstances, that truth was hard to accept. The family began therapy together. It wasn't easy. Trust had been shattered. Daniel had kept secrets long before the disappearance. He'd been involved in criminal activity even if coerced and hadn't told Maria. He'd put them all at risk. These were not simple things to forgive or move past, but slowly, over months, they started to rebuild. Daniel moved into a separate apartment initially. He and Maria saw each other regularly, but didn't immediately resume their marriage. They dated again, in a strange way, getting to know each other as the people they'd become during the 7 years apart. Elena and Sophia visited their father, but the relationship felt different now. They loved him but struggled with anger and resentment alongside that love. The legal aftermath took time to resolve. Daniel testified against the people who'd coerced him. His testimony helped convict multiple individuals involved in the money laundering network. The trial revealed the scope of the operation. Hundreds of millions of dollars moved through fake companies, corrupted officials in multiple countries, violence used to maintain control. Daniel had been a small piece of a much larger criminal enterprise. The story eventually became public. News outlets covered the incredible tale of the man who disappeared from a cruise ship and returned 7 years later. The Costa family received requests for interviews, book deals, documentary proposals. They declined everything. This wasn't a story they wanted to sell. It was a trauma they were trying to heal from. 2 years after Daniel's return, he and Maria renewed their wedding vows. It was a small ceremony, just family and close friends. Elena and Sophia stood beside their parents. It was a statement of commitment to moving forward, even if the past could never be erased. Daniel returned to work, though not as an accountant. He became a consultant for federal agencies, helping identify financial fraud patterns. He used the skills that had once made him valuable to criminals to help fight them instead. The family learned to live with the complexity of what happened. Daniel was both a victim and someone who'd made choices that hurt people he loved. He'd been coerced but also hadn't fought hard enough initially to find another way. He'd protected them but also abandoned them. These contradictions didn't resolve neatly. They remained, and the family learned to hold them all at once. Sometimes the truth doesn't come in clean categories. Sometimes people are forced into impossible situations where every choice causes harm. Sometimes victims make mistakes and still deserve compassion. Sometimes families break and find ways to heal that don't erase the breaking, but build something new from the pieces. Daniel Costa disappeared on a cruise ship 7 years ago, but he also came back. Most missing persons cases don't end this way. Most families never get answers. Most disappearances remain mysteries. The Costa family got their answers, and with those answers came the hard work of forgiveness, rebuilding, and learning to trust again. The customs officer in Rotterdam who found that filing cabinet never could have imagined the chain of events his discovery would trigger. A routine inspection, a gut feeling about a container's weight, a decision to look closer. Sometimes that's all it takes. Someone paying attention, someone refusing to let an inconsistency slide, someone doing their job thoroughly. Henrik Vanderberg received a commendation from Interpol. He also received a letter from Maria Costa, thanking him for giving her family a chance to heal. The case file on Daniel Costa's disappearance remains in FBI archives, marked as resolved. But for the Costa family, resolution isn't the same as closure. Closure suggests an ending. What they have instead is a continuation of life, of relationship, of the complicated work of being a family that was broken and chose to piece itself back together. Every year on the anniversary of the night Daniel disappeared, the family spends the day together. They don't celebrate exactly. They acknowledge. They remember what was lost and what was found. They honor the 7 years of pain and the possibility of healing. They talk about trust and fear and the ways people fail each other and sometimes find ways to forgive. Daniel lives with the weight of his choices every day. He sees it in his daughter's eyes when they hesitate before trusting him with something important. He sees it in Maria's face when she wakes from nightmares about losing him again. He can't undo what happened. He can only keep showing up, keep choosing them, keep proving through years of consistent presence that he's not leaving again. This is the reality of complicated trauma. There's no single moment of healing, no dramatic revelation that fixes everything. Just the daily choice to stay, to be honest, to work toward something better than what was broken. The story of Daniel Costa's disappearance reminds us that mystery and truth can coexist. That answers don't always bring peace. That sometimes the people we think we know best are carrying burdens we can't imagine. That ordinary people can be swept into extraordinary circumstances. That courage looks different depending on the situation. Sometimes it's fighting, sometimes it's running, sometimes it's coming back. It reminds us that investigators who refuse to give up matter. That small details, a fake social media account, a filing cabinet's weight, phone records from years ago, can be the threads that unravel entire conspiracies. That patience and persistence and attention to detail can bring people home. Most of all, it reminds us that families are resilient in ways we can't predict. That love is more complicated than movies suggest. That forgiveness is a process, not an event. That sometimes the greatest act of hope is choosing to rebuild what was destroyed. Knowing it will never look the same as before, but trusting it can still be valuable, still be real, still be worth the effort. Daniel Costa disappeared on a cruise ship. 7 years later, he came home. The space between those two facts contains enough pain, complexity, and perseverance to fill a lifetime. The Costa family is still writing the rest of the story, one ordinary day at a time.